So you want to shoot 45 ACP, but you don't want it to be a 1911. CZ answered that with the 97, and I wanted to take that to the next level. In this video, I take two CZ 97s from good to great. Welcome to the Gentleman Gunner. If you're new to my channel, this is a shooting channel for the distinguished gentleman. And if you are a loyal subscriber, you actually might know where this shirt comes from, so hit that like button if you do. To give some context, I have been on a journey with messing around with 45 ACP guns very recently. Well, being sort of a CZ fanboy, I decided to look into the 97. Now, they have been discontinued since 2022, so getting a hold of one of these can be interesting. Now, why I have two is because one is the standard safety model and the other is a Decocker model. Originally, I only intended to do just the Decocker model, and my reason for getting this specific model is because I liked the positioning where the Decocker was, because where the safety is on most CZ75s is about in this area. Now, the challenge I had with that is when I started shooting this gun, there were occasional times where I would in fact hit the cock lever in recoil. So what would happen was, let's say I'm firing, I would be firing, and in the middle of recoil, my thumb would push this down just by accident, bringing it to quarter cock. The easiest way to solve that was to get the conventional safety model, and that's how I ended up with both of these. So now here's the thing. Because these are discontinued, they are starting to get a little bit harder to pick up on the secondhand market, especially if you're interested in the Decocker model. To give you an idea, I ended up paying $880 for this thing in its factory configuration, and nothing special done to it. But if you don't want the Decocker model, there are a few more B variants out there with the standard safety setup, and I actually got this one for $700. So I would say if you're looking for a cost savings and perhaps don't need the Decocker, this is definitely the way to go. Now, starting with the sights, because that was the first thing that desperately needed attention from the factory, because originally they just had these odd little nubs in the back and a very anemic looking front sight. These are the Dawson EZD, and one thing I do appreciate is that the sight post is a little narrow, so when you look through the rear sights of this, you can actually call shots way easier than you could with the stock sights. Both have the CZ Customs grip panels, and they are very aggressive, and additionally this is designed to mate with their internal magwell here. As you can see, it's a fairly large magwell, so doing reloads with this thing did take a little bit of practice even with the magwell, largely because on these guns with narrow mags they just seat differently. It still took me getting used to. What comes with the trigger kit with this is a 13-pound mainspring. Now, what I couldn't find was the recoil spring, so I ended up getting a DPM recoil system. Now, for the purpose of this video, I kept it stock because I want you to be able to see the recoil impulse and the return to zero, because I think it's very interesting. And with the DPM recoil system, it depends on the gun, but most of the time, especially if it's just regular 9mm loads, I really am not a fan of them. But I will say in a heavier caliber with a little bit more pushback on it, I think it's actually worth it. Now, talking about the trigger group, I did go with the Cajun Gunworks Reach Reduction Kit for both of them, so the pull and double action and single action is significantly reduced. Now, the funny thing is the B model was a fairly straightforward installation, but I had never done a Decocker model prior to this. And what's very different is that you can actually pull out the sear on the B variant. Now on the Decocker model, the pin that holds in all the sear, the springs, including the spring for the Decocker, runs through the frame. So long story short, I ended up having to buy a slave pin because I tried to make my own with a trick I used on my Walther back in the day with a used up toothpick. And it didn't work on this gun because it ended up breaking, and it also ended up bending L-springs. And L-springs on both these guns are a pain in the butt to not only put in, but also they're easy to break. Now this is where they are just a touch different, was that there are slightly different pulls. Now I think with more time on each gun it may be a different characteristic. Now YouTube is a little strange when I talk about trigger pulls, so I'm just gonna let you take a look at what they end up coming out. So starting with the Decocker model. Okay, and right there, we'll go with now the Cello, which is just the regular model. As you can see, they're about the same. Now in single action, that's where it came in with the Decocker model. And on the Cello, that's where we landed with that, and that was a pretty big surprise, and you can feel the difference between the two when you use them. And I want to actually briefly talk about the feel of that, because it is slightly different from like a Shadow 2 having a firing pin block in both of these. Walking you through that double action, it's a very light pre-travel, and you get to the first mounted bit of pressure here. And this is why I love the Cajun Gunworks kit, because it really is just a straight pull back. And this part of this kit too is their trigger shoe, so I ended up going with this. All right, so going in single action now, you've got just a touch of pre-travel there, and it feels nice and sprung too as well. And so you get to that first wall, right? And you do have to go through a little bit of creak because of the firing pin block, so just pushing through that a little bit there, show you, and a break. Now that reset, okay, coming out, go slow. There it is. I didn't really even hear it, but I felt it. Probably was because I pulled it out slowly, but right back on the wall and break. Okay, so now you've gotten a closer look at both of these guns, and they do have their own unique attributes to them, as you've noticed. Now it's time to get into the shooting experience. Now, before I do that, I ask if you like this video, please hit that like button, as that helps me a lot. And you are gonna wanna subscribe, because I will constantly be coming out with good to great content and plenty of reviews. Additionally, if you want to see the build list for this, I will leave a link to my website and you can check that out. And now, if you're new to my channel, I do 2 general tests on guns. Controlled, which is a set of drills at the range, and dynamic. Dynamic being a situation that's not necessarily as controlled, but is more applicable to real-world situation. In this case, a match. Now, I like to establish this with baseline data, and I actually started with the Decocker model. One thing I noticed immediately was how accurate the gun was. This gun could stack rounds at 15 yards with ease, and with 45 that can be interesting. Now, one of the attributes that I've seen consistently when I was doing my research is the recoil impulse of the 97 over a traditional 1911. I did find that the recoil impulse was a little bit more gentle than the 1911 I had on hand. But in the good to great testing, we like to validate that more with doubles. Now, if you're not familiar with that, I actually start with a controlled pair, and my goal is to keep it within a 3 to 4 inch group and see how quick I can generate splits with that. Now, on the particular day when I actually went to test this one, I did bring out my Fusion Firearms 1911. Now, the Fusion Firearms 1911 did have the most muzzle rise, but counteracted that with a slow return back into batteries. On the same day, I brought this gun back out as well, but I did keep the stock recoil spring in it, and I was surprised that it did in fact shoot a little bit more gentle. When I actually went to this, because normally with the DPM setups, like, I appreciate how they feel in the hands, but in terms of performance, there's usually a compromise, such as it may get knocked out of battery easy, is typically the most common thing, especially in competition when you go to knock down a port. With this instance, I would say when you are running full power 45, the DPM 97 is in fact an advantage. On this next drill, which is 25-yard bill drill, in which I am trying to hit an 8-inch circle at 25 yards. Now, this is where you start to see the summation of all these parts come together, because at this range, it matters how quick I can return to zero, the quality of the single action pull, because the more disturbance in the trigger, the more you're gonna have an off shot. And additionally, really good sights with a longer sight radius, so I can in fact squeeze precision at that type of range. And this is where the good to great setup absolutely destroyed it on this test. I decided to shoot Licello in a match. And so I wanted to spend some time warming up with this, especially in the double action. Now, one thing I did catch immediately in my warm up is that I occasionally had the light strikes with the Freedom Munitions 230. That's why I would probably consider a 15-pound mainspring to really ensure that you can cover a variety of different ammo, especially if you like to shoot double action like I like to. Now, as far as single action, this thing lit off all sorts of different rounds. From my experience, it usually takes me a few stages to kind of get up to a competitive speed with this. And what I had chose to do from a shooting perspective is respect the gun, which means I'm seeing 2 sets of good sights until I can start to build speed. And that ended up paying off very well for me, because then I started to lean on the gun's mechanical performance and the shots showed up. And by the time I started to get into the 4th, 5th, and 6th stage, I was starting to have very good hits with this. And mind you, these were fairly technical stages with some distance to them. And on the very last stage, you'll see that there was a fair amount of distance and some tight targets with high risk, and I ended up hitting that stage 0 down. And if you're not familiar with the IDPA scoring, that means within this 8-inch circle or even in the head, I was hitting in the ideal spot.
Yeah.
Have you not shot that before? That's your first time to shoot it?
Yeah. I was like, that's not soft.
All right, so where does this leave us with the CZ97? Well, I think for what it really cost me to get into this thing, and I'll leave that build list on my website, I really loved the performance of this, because all in I was less than most high-end 1911s. Now, is it the 1911 with the trigger and perhaps as balanced? No, but it is a good alternative for that CZ nut that just has to have this, and for a guy like me that likes to actually shoot double action. So this is who this is for. Now, I did film the up-close version of this and this portion of this separately, and in that time, CZ did in fact have a restock of their actual 97 base pads that fit this mag well, so you can in fact go check those out, and if they have them in stock, grab them. Now, with that said, guys, if you are a CZ nut, I have plenty of CZ content for you guys, everything from USPSA to reviews, and I'll leave that playlist right here for you. And I did recently take a Shadow 2 compact from 0 to a state winning championship gun, and I'll leave that ultimate playlist right here for you. But until then, guys, we will see you all at the range.